except this one doesn't exist anymore. So there again, an airman who spent time in Maynard Air Force Base, and those days are gone. So what did they do there? They trained all the undergraduate navigators all across Army, Navy, Air Force, Marine, Coast Guard, anybody who flew an instantiation to include NATO and allies. If you flew an aircraft, you were getting your undergraduate training there, and then of course, many of them came here and learned how to do navigator training on the C-130. There was a SAC wing there too, and at that time, again, the Cold War was going on. We had B-52 bombers with the tail gunners. It was the G model, and then there was also refuelers there. And the idea was we had to have bombers and refuelers dispersed around the globe so that at any time, if the Soviets attacked, we would be able to launch a retaliatory attack if need be. So aside from those two wings, the one thing I did notice in his performance reports that would grow in significance is his very first deployment was to a small base in Arkansas at Volant Scorpion. And Volant Scorpion was actually a huge air-based ground defense exercise here at Little Rock. And as Chief can tell you, if you drive back to the facilities back there, they really haven't changed for 27 years. So, except, I don't think they still have the coal-burning stoves in there. Is that right?
They do not.
The coal-burning stoves are gone, and the reason I know this is because Airman First Class Snyder used to have to pitch coal in there. The NCOs would say, "Snyder, get up, it's getting cold in here, throw some coal in there." And so he had to do that, but so I'm sure somewhere in there that must have been favorable enough that the Chief kind of tucked that away, that hey, this Little Rock Air Force Base maybe might be a good thing. So before he leaves Mather and heads overseas, it's quoted in his records, A1C Snyder is indeed a professional. His dedication to duty is truly an asset to his unit. His performance and motivation are recognized by his superiors as above and beyond the standard of his peers. Further, he's selected as senior airman below the zone. Now, for the benefit of the family, so you can understand this, if you have 20 airmen first class that are doing great things in our Air Force, and you look at all of them and you say, well, who's the one that's doing it a little bit better than everybody else? That would have been Airman First Class Snyder, and so he got promoted 6 months earlier than his peers to senior airman. So from there, he goes to his second assignment. So that's the 1012th Air Base Group at Thule Air Base, Greenland. So how many folks have ever been to Greenland in here? Okay, wow. So 3 of you. Okay, so a little Greenland reunion afterwards. He was a law enforcement patrolman there. Thule Air Base is the Armed Forces' northernmost installation. Now, so if you look at it on a globe, it's located 750 miles north of the Arctic Circle. And it's an environment which the only thing that I could find significant about it was it's the only place in the world where 3 icebergs meet. So you have the one in North Star Bay, one on the Polar Ice Sheet, and one on Bolsonholm Fjord. So, needless to say, Thule is considered a remote assignment, although I don't think Chief quite knew what that meant. So they did the 21st Space Wing's global network of sensors providing missile warning and space surveillance and space control for NORAD. And of course, at that time, if there were any missiles that were going to be coming from our counterpart, they were just right over the top of the North Pole, and that's what Chief did. He helped support that mission. And of course, at that time, during the Cold War, we had military bases all over North America and Western Europe to protect. And then, of course, all kinds of cargo aircraft flew in and out of there. Can you guess what kind of aircraft made frequent stops there? C-130. So I don't know this last part to be exactly true, but I can't confirm in the history books. But I've been told that the Soviet Union decided to dismantle and tear down the Berlin Wall in 1989 because President Reagan said, "I'm going to leave Senior Airman Snyder here at Thule if you guys don't tear down the wall." Is that kind of the way it happened, Chief?
Yeah, we talked about that.
Yeah, okay. So that's pretty much how it happened. Then the Soviet threat rapidly diminished, and then Buck Sergeant Snyder could relax because the world was a safe place for democracy. So the observations from his leadership there at Thule was the same, and I quote, "Senior Airman Snyder's desire to excel and improve his overall effectiveness in the security police career field is most evident. As I read his performance reports, his quality control evaluations for Desk Sergeant were 98.4 and 97%. And while he was there, he was the 1012th Air Base Group's Airman of the Quarter and was also the flight's nominee for Airman of the Year. He then pinned on Buck Sergeant prior to his departure. So how many NCOs in here have ever worn Buck Sergeant? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, but again, kind of a dying breed. So again, history is kind of moving out, and you won't find many people who wore Buck Sergeant. So his next assignment, he comes to Chanute Air Force Base in Illinois. He's at the 33 45th Security Police Squadron. Chief will tell you that when he was at Thule, he calls the career field manager, and they asked him where did he want to go. And he hesitated. He wasn't used to someone asking him what he wanted to do, so he says, I guess Chanute, it's close to home. So he hears the typewriter clicking, and the NCO says, done, you're going to Chanute. So Chanute was a base just south of Chicago. Again, 1917, an old base, World War I era installation, and it was named in honor of Octave Chanute, who was a pioneer and friend of the Wright brothers. So upon arrival there, Sergeant Snyder assumed desk sergeant duties, and he did that for 4 years of his 4.5 years. But he only wore buck sergeant for just a short amount of time. Then he pinned on staff sergeant his first time testing, which means he had on E5 in under 4 years. Again, just another phenomenal thing. While he was there, he was selected as the Air Base Group Non-Commissioned Officer of the Year and a finalist for the Chanute Technical Training Center Non-Commissioned Officer of the Year. They said in his records, his expertise in security police career field demonstrates that he is wise beyond his years. So can anyone guess why he left that base?
Cross-training.
He closed it down, just like me. So at the time of the closure, though, Chanute was the third oldest active base in the entire Air Force, and the lieutenant unit, the Chanute Technical Training Center, was in fact the oldest technical training center in the United States Air Force. Again, Chief was part of some of the history that saw that draw down. Now, Chief did something here that I'm not going to encourage everybody to do, but when the folks were looking to close the base, he took some memorabilia from the base. It was something that he found at the hitching post outside the front gate. Chief, can you point to the memorabilia you took from Chanute Air Force Base? That's right. Okay. So yes, that's right. That's where he met his lovely wife, Dawn. So now, as you can start to wonder, any base or community watching then Staff Sergeant Snyder's early assignments was a little worried to have him come to their base next. So, but he ends up coming back to this little base in the Midwest where he went on his first exercise. So in May 1983, almost 20 years ago, he starts his journey at Little Rock. He's a law enforcement patrolman protecting the base and the C-130 mission here. No sooner than he gets here, though, he does what many of our defenders do, and I saw we got some defenders over there, so good to see you guys again. All right, we're running formation afterwards. Is that what we do? Okay. To deploy to Operation Continue Hope in Kenya, Africa. So Sergeant Snyder was a squad leader of a 13-man team that was sent by the President to support operations down there. And that's something, again, just for the family members. It's not that we just think, hey, let's just send some bodies here to go do this thing. Everything that we do is because the President of the United States says this is so important that I want this combat capability or this peacekeeping operation or whatever it is. He directs that, he or she, and then we take action and make it happen. And that's what Chief did. So he goes down to Africa, and again, I'm reminding myself because I thought the world was a safer place after the Soviet collapse. But this was when his deployment was in response to about 500,000 Somalis had died during famine from the fall of '92, and then hundreds of thousands more were in danger of dying. Big peacekeeping operation going on down there, clan violence interfering. They killed 25 Pakistani peacekeepers, and that's when the U.S. starts to really get more involved. And then we sent in a lot of forces, and unfortunately, the day that we did send some forces in, October 3rd of 1993, was when the helicopters dropped about 120 elite forces into Mogadishu, and the mission was to abduct a couple of senior, our top lieutenants of the Somalian warlords, and of course many of you know the book Black Hawk Down or the movie. So Chief went down there after that happened, and the Air Force in their role had an airfield with a contingent of AC-130 Spectre gunships, again another variation of that C-130 doing great stuff, I love that. Went to Mombasa, Kenya to support the Somalian operations, and you can look, it's just right at the coastline there. So Sergeant Snyder and his team went in to guard that base and the runways as part of that Operation Continue Hope. And as Chief will tell you, if the Air Force gunships were flying, then the food and distribution channels remained open, and the much-needed supplies were getting to the Somalian refugees that were starving. So again, Sergeant Snyder, part of history. Unfortunately, one of the gunships from his base was lost on 14th of March over the Indian Ocean while practice firing a 105mm howitzer, and then there was a premature detonation. It went down. They lost 8 crew members that day. There was also a second gunship on the base that caught fire. Chief actually responded to that one and actually helped put out the fire, and said in his citation, he quickly initiated firefighting procedures for preventing further damage to the aircraft and ensuring the safety of all personnel on board. Chief says it's not that big of a deal, and I said there's ammunition on board, there's fire on board. I'm thinking it's a big deal if I'm on that plane, so had I been there, I would have thanked you, Chief, for putting out that fire. He knows sooner, and again, this is all, we're still in the same year time frame. He knows sooner than he gets back, and then Operation Continue Hope kicks off. Operation Restore Democracy in Haiti. So again, some of you may remember from your history books that a military coup in Haiti overthrew the government. And I actually had a major in my squadron as I was going over the notes and explaining some of this stuff to him that the chief had seen. He goes, I was actually down there as a missionary during that time frame, and it was brutal. He said that the different factions would set up road guards and they would pull people out of their vehicles, and depending upon what you said as far as your alliance was, you might get machete. So a lot of people dying, a lot of starvation. There was no infrastructure down there, and so again, so when they pulled him over, he learned very quickly missionar, which means I'm a missionary, and that's how he survived down there. So it was definitely a tough time frame for the Haitian people. And we had been planning then. The U.S. said, okay, well, after a couple of years of this, we're going to go with. They had a couple different plans that were put on the shelf. Anybody that's done contingency war planning, if you go back and look at the history books, you'll see this. But we actually had a full-blown kick down the door operation that we were going to send forces in. Staff Sergeant Snyder and the squad here from Little Rock, they go down to Miami, Florida, and then just prior to operation commencement, last-ditch effort by President Clinton to avoid bloodshed, they dispatched a negotiating team led by former President Jimmy Carter. And that's when the operation ceased and they agreed to leave peacefully. We had in fact already had an airborne, 3,900 paratroopers airborne into the invasion. So again, it wasn't in my history book, but I'm thinking that President Carter probably said, hey, I got Staff Sergeant Snyder up there in Miami with his 13 defenders, so they agreed that, yeah, that's probably not a good idea. One of the things, though, I will tell you is Chief said, yeah, I think, we thought we were going to spend the day in Miami. This is good, and we'll go back to Little Rock. And it didn't exactly work out that way. There were C-5s that came from Dover and Griffiths and C-141s that came from McGuire. And there was only one port that they could fly all those forces into, and all the relief supplies and whatnot. And then from there, they had to distribute it out over the island. But it was all mountainous. There was no road infrastructure. So how do you get the forces from that port, from that runway to the other places on the base? Is there an aircraft that can, land on the little salt strips somewhere in the world and deliver those kind of supplies? Well, that's what Chief ended up doing. He found out that I'm not going back to Little Rock, so they flew C-130s into Cap Haitian from Rosie Roads and delivered the supplies. So he did that. His team and again the Haitian people today, they don't know that. They don't even really know who Staff Sergeant Snyder was, but they're alive because the actions of his team provided to support the relief missions. So somehow in the fall, all the fun of '94, he was promoted to Tech Sergeant, then he goes to Fort Stewart, Georgia, where he's got an operational readiness inspection, and then this is what I quote from his leadership: he guided his squad during simulated combat situations to ensure all phases of the inspection were successfully completed. But keep in mind, he's done 2 real-world deployments with real-world ops, so I'm thinking that he could have did that stuff in his sleep, and oh, by the way, he was selected then for the Inspector General Superior Performer Award for that entire operation, ORI, after 2 real-world deployments, all in the same year. So again, for the family, what does that mean? Okay, you got about 20 people doing great things in our Air Force. One's doing it just a little bit better than the other folks. That was then Staff Sergeant, at that time, then Tech Sergeant Snyder. So I got to believe somewhere through there, Don's rethinking, okay, maybe this career field that he's in is not a good thing. But he doesn't decide to change right away. He comes back, and again, I would remind folks too, I think you already walked through, some of you walked through Heritage Park, but take a look at some of the operations that this base and the missions and the people have been involved in. He comes back, he's investigations element leader, so his attention detail proved to be very critical to that job on this base. He did it for many years. His personal case solve rate initially was 61%. He recovered lots of money while he was doing that. He also went to the Non-Commissioned Officers Academy and the U.S. Army Military Police Investigators course, where he got the Distinguished Graduate of both those classes. Again, for the family, it just means, okay, you've got these classes, someone's going to be right near the top of the class. Well, that was Tech Sergeant Leslie Snyder for both of those classes. So he continues his impressive climb, 61% solve rate in 95, 63% in 96, 74% in 97, $81,000 in equipment recovered. So why is this significant? Well, the average within all the bases, and if you can believe this, we were actually in Air Combat Command, because I had to ask him, I said, did they make a mistake in your records? This says that Air Combat Command. No, this base was actually Air Combat Command right when TAC went away. So at this point, he's up into the mid to high 70s, almost 80%. The command solve rate was 50%. So this is where I actually have to apologize to the family, because I can imagine you guys coming home, and he's there, he's got the heat lamp on, he's like, all right, why were you 3 minutes late after school today? You know, or maybe saying to Don, hey Don, I noticed the checking account here was $3.64 withdrawn here at 9:03, and you were supposed to be at work at 9 o'clock. Oh, that was you, yeah, okay, well, so, Chief was quite the detective, really, and seriously, if you look at that, that's some of the stuff that he did. Just his records, I don't think, have probably been touched since then. So he was very good at what he did. He also, I'm not sure why this was in your records, but it says he was handpicked to perform undercover security team for a DV at an air show. Do you remember who that was for? Who was that for?
An air show?
Yes. It was Miss Arkansas. And so it's like this big write-up. Yeah, Don.
You must not have impressed me.
Yeah, Don. I don't know who I was doing undercover detail security work for. But, so Sergeant Snyder, then Tech Sergeant, again, 70% in 98, greater than 70%, and then selected for promotion to Master Sergeant, and then he departs in 99. So, the big takeaway, and honestly, I am trying to go fast, because if you just look at his records, he's got a ton of stuff in there, but I will tell you, he was involved in every facet of involvement with the lives of his airmen back then as a Tech Sergeant and then a Master Sergeant, whether it was involvement in their significant self-improvement, whether he was pushing school, whether he was playing in a team sport, he was all over it. So, for the young kids in the room, just take note of that, because you're going to continue to see that. So, in 1999, we're getting closer. Master Sergeant Snyder goes to Tyndall Air Force Base, Florida. I think, though, again, he had to tell folks in Little Rock that, hey, if you agree to bring me back, I won't shut the base down. So they agree to ship him down. He goes down to Tyndall, where they do a fighter aircraft mission. Fighter's not nearly as good as the C-130, but that's okay. We got to have him. He arrives, he's the senior non-commissioned officer in charge of police services, and of course he's, not only is a brand new Master Sergeant, but he's new to the base. And in his first performance appraisal, he's already #1 Master Sergeant in the Security Forces Squadron of 9 Master Sergeants. And that was at the time that we had just merged the career fields. The wing commander says he's in the top 5 of 235 Master Sergeants in the wing, and he quotes, "One of Team Tyndall's finest, time is now, promotion to this board is a must." However, as happens sometimes in the Air Force, the promotion board wasn't listening, so he gets a new wing commander who says he's still in the top 5 Master Sergeants in the wing. The 325th Support Group Senior NCO of the Year definitely promote to Senior Master Sergeant this year. So apparently they get the message. The next board comes out. He's already then moved up to Scott Air Force Base, and he comes out on the Senior Master Sergeant list. So the thing that's significant, again, for the family, if you think about it, if there's 100 enlisted people in the Air Force, only 2 of them are allowed to wear that rank of Senior Master Sergeant at any given time, and only 1% will ever wear the rank of Chief Master Sergeant. So I think what's really impressive about this is he's left the career field that he's obviously loved and he's done very well at, but he then moves over into communications. Up at Air Mobility Command, he's in charge of the network infrastructure for the entire command, all the bases that fall underneath it. And that sounds impressive, but then you got to remember, they put him in charge of that, but he's a 15-year veteran of security forces. So they also put him in charge of the maintenance for the telephone switches, which was odd, because there's another senior NCO who would have had to have had that. I'm not sure why someone else why he would have been doing that. And that's all great, except in the next year they're making the superintendent of all the maintenance management for all the communications and information career field. So he's got 3 senior NCOs that probably have 50 years total of senior comm and info maintenance in the Air Force, and he's in charge of them, telling them what they need to be doing. Sometime through there, he finds time to get his GPA. I'm a little embarrassed to say this. It was only a 3.9%. So that means you probably got a B+ or an A- in there somewhere, Chief. I'm a little disappointed. But that's okay. It happens. Then he goes on and gets a second remote. So I'm not sure if you didn't get it right the first time, or you just said, hey, let's go do something else. They say, and honestly, how many people have been on 2 remotes? About 5, 6, 7, 8. Not too many people have been on 2 remotes. I'm not sure. I always tell folks that you make the assignments people mad. But so he goes on a second remote, a little place in the Republic of Korea called Osan Air Base. In fact, we got a young airman here in Rockcom that's going to be heading off that way. It's about 40 miles south of Seoul, and the best I can tell, about 80 miles from the border of North Korea. It wasn't very far from where General Douglas MacArthur's Incheon invasion took place. And again, it's the home of Pacific Air Force's fighter wing, so fighter aircraft. Very important mission there. We've also got A-10s and F-16s there. And for the benefit of the family members again, that base is the most forward deployed of all of our fixed bases in the Air Force. So what that really means is it's the closest permanent base to an enemy. And if you think that's not a frightening location to be, I'd encourage you to all check out the news where in the last 24 hours, Kim Jong-un basically said he threatened a preemptive nuclear attack if we increased the sanctions on the country. So still very much a hot spot in the world, and Chief was there at an interesting time, and I gotta believe he probably did some time with the gas mask, crawling under the tables, doing drills.
6 hours one time.
6 hours. So, definitely an interesting place, and Chief was right there. So what did his senior leadership say? He, number 1 of 10 senior NCOs. His squadron commander said he was the number 1 senior master sergeant of 5, and critical to garnering 2 PACAF Communications and Information Awards, including the Best Large Communications Squadron. So finally it's time to come home. Senior Master Sergeant Snyder comes back to Little Rock in July of 2005, where he is the superintendent of the Network Control Center. So Chief Thomas, his flight superintendent, says he's the best senior NCO I've worked with in 27 years. His squadron commander says, consistently amazes me, my number 1 of 14 senior NCOs. Now this is what's kind of interesting to me. Given his records in Korea and here, he was a shoo-in for promotion, except he doesn't get promoted. And so the Air Force does something that really challenged Senior Master Sergeant Snyder. And I told you the Air Force's fleet was continuing to age. We need to modernize aircraft. Very difficult. The Air Force makes a very difficult decision, I know it was, but to cut 40,000 airmen out of the personnel accounts to save about $6 billion that they thought we could buy more aircraft. It was called Program Budget Decision 720. I still wake up in the middle of the night and have nightmares about PBD 720. I'm at the Pentagon when this is announced. The A6, the Senior Communicator and Information Officer, a 3-star general, he came and spoke to us actually last year in UCOM and I asked him about that decision. And he said the initial decision was to cut 2,500 airmen out of that career field. And that they said, no, that's not good enough, you've got to come back and do some more analysis. Okay, so we do some more analysis. We make some investment infrastructure here for remote management, and we take some risk here, 3,500 airmen will cut out of the career field. They do all the math from all the other career fields. They said, no, that's not good enough. You're the 2nd largest career field but behind pilots, so we need to get to a nice even 40,000 number, so you're going to lose 9,100 airmen out of that career field. So what does that mean? So I'm setting the stage here now for context. And of course, then Major Dusek was living it, you know, having a grand old time. The guys called me down at the assignments team and said, hey, where are you going to at Little Rock? And I said, that's odd. Wouldn't you know and you be telling me? And they said, well, it says you're going to be the communications squadron, but what billet are you going into? And I said, well, the comm squadron billet there. And he said, well, there's no officer billets there at Little Rock. All the billets have been wiped out because of PBD 720. So they didn't even know where they were going to send me to other than I was coming here because they had taken that many billets out of the squadron. So what do? We have to collapse all the operations units from 3 flights into 1 flight. We put Senior Master Sergeant Snyder in charge of the flight as a superintendent, where he now has 85% of the day-to-day ops of the squadron. Now, Chief, you can't say you didn't get paid for all that increased responsibility, because I did look, on January 1st, you did get a pay raise still for a couple years there, so good job. Okay, so the remote management of the network. That's what we were going to do, right? We're going to consolidate the network. It'll be easy. Many of you lost your airmen out of the squadrons. I'm told we actually put them back in now, which that's good. But it was painful at the time, I'll tell you. We had many of the airmen, many who are still in this room, that were on 12-hour shifts, 7 days a week. They had to keep up with the patching. They had to keep up with the trouble tickets. And then they'd also, oh, by the way, passed a law that said you had to have all these cyber certifications. So 8 hours a day they'd work, 4 hours a day they'd go to school. And we did that for 7 days in a row. And we do it for about 6 weeks at a time in an effort to try and just keep up with the workload. Interesting that the 19 airmen in the NCC actually dropped down to 5 airmen in the NCC, but the medical group, civil engineer squadron, forces support squadron, those network shops in those organizations actually had more people than we had back on the floor at a couple different points in times. And in one particular instance, we had our 1 tech sergeant right here. She was the lone NCO. We had 4 more, but we deployed them. That's what we do. So 4 are gone. We have 1 NCO. where we used to have 19 running all the servers. So what does the Air Force do? They help us out. They send us 4 kids out of tech school. And for those kids that are now senior airmen and staff sergeants, you were kids when you came. Don't take offense to it, but that's just the way it was. And so now she has to train 4 airmen on all the network stuff while still managing that. So it was a pretty tough time. Yes, I got to know her kids because I was stepping over them on the floor while they were sleeping back on the Network Control Center. And I remember calling her in one Saturday that she had worked literally 30 days straight. It's not something I'm proud of, but I didn't know any other way to do it. If I could start pounding on the keyboard, I would have. So she was heading off to a soccer game. Her husband's here. I said, "Hey, thanks for coming in. How's things at the house?" She's like, "Well, when I got the call that there was an outage, I left 2 angry peanut butter and jelly sandwiches being smashed together to go to the soccer game." And that's no deference to her husband, but those were some tough times. And I thanked him again today for what he did to support that particular time. So I tell you all these things just to let you know that these were defining moments for the squadron, for Senior Master Sergeant Snyder. And he says, "I'm done." He comes and tells me it's time to go. I'm dropping my retirement paperwork. He can't believe what the airmen are enduring, and he feels powerless to help it. And I'll be honest with you, so did I. So what's the first question you ask when someone tells you that? The very first thing you do is say, what does your spouse want to do? Because if the spouse says it, you're done, you're done. So what does the spouse say? He says, well, she says, I should stay until they kick me out. Okay, I can work with that. So I said, all right, well, I can, I started thinking about it. And I'll be honest with you, you all know this, but chiefs play mental games with the commanders, right? I mean, that's what you guys do to kind of cajole us and manipulate us and stuff like that. But I said, all right, I'm going to play a little mental game with the senior master sergeant. Because I needed him in a bad way, but I certainly respected his decision. But I said, I thought of this quote. General Colin Powell, in his book, My American Journey, I highly recommend you read it, says, leadership is solving problems. The day soldiers stop bringing you problems is the day you stop leading them. They have either lost confidence that you can help, or they have concluded that you do not care. Either is a failure of leadership. So thinking about that rationale, I told the chief, I said, don't worry about what I think, don't worry about what the group commanders think, don't worry about your peers, don't worry about the wing commanders. I said, if you can tell me that you are not making a difference in the lives of the airmen of the squadron, then absolutely you should go. I told him to take a few days and think about it. And I told you this was a mind game because I already knew the answer to that question. He has a leather couch in the office. I'm not sure, either Chief Qualls got the leather couch or Chief Snyder, but there were always airmen in on that leather couch. It was like take a number, and he was solving problems. So by General Colin Powell's own definition, I knew that he was doing grassroots leadership that we really needed in the squadron. So when I look back at his records, he should have pinned on Chief. He hadn't done it already, and in a science that no one really knows for sure. He gets his degree, and we deploy him, and that puts him over the top. Now, this is honestly the first time, I will tell you this is the first time I've ever seen someone pin on the rank of Chief Master Sergeant before they tested. Anybody ever see that one in this room? Nobody.
No, it's after I tested.
No. Let me tell a story, Chief.
Oh, okay.
So, he goes and he tests in mid-January, because he's deployed, so he's got to come back, do the supplemental board, he tests. The release comes out. So, okay, you're on the list. Well, what do? They say, okay, well, your data rank is back to January 1st. So his data rank was actually before he actually tested to know he made it. So I said, hey, that's not fair. You actually pinned on before you tested. Isn't that true? That's how it happened. So, so he made chief, and so now here's kind of the moral of the story. I'm going to tell everybody here. It's real simple how you make chief. I'm going to tell you. It's just 3 little steps that I learned from watching him. It's easy. Write this down if you want to. So, the first rule is take ownership of your Air Force. The second rule, and some of you in this room will know this, but every airman has a story. You can't lead your airmen if you don't know theirs. And third is educate yourself. The environment you will face in the future demands it. So now let me tell you really about the first time I met Senior Master Sergeant Snyder and how I saw these 3 rules in action. So I showed up at my first unit PT. They're playing reveille. A couple of airmen kind of sneak in from the back, so you can kind of hear them there. And Deb always had them facing the flag there, shirts tucked in, right? Okay, so that's what we did. Some airmen sneak in from the back. And so I'm the new squadron commander. This is my squadron. So I'm all right. Now I got to give a lecture as soon as we're done. Well, before I can say anything, as soon as it's done, Senior Master Sergeant Snyder jumps in and says, "Whoever the airmen were that snuck in, come see me afterwards, and don't make me find out who you were." Now he used some lettered words that were more than 3 and less than 5. It was very motivational. I was excited to hear him. But anyways, the airmen went and saw him. And he fixed that, and I said, okay, good. That's what I'm happy to see. I'm happy to see the senior NCOs in this squadron, especially that one, taking control and ownership of their Air Force. The other thing I told him too is I said, if you find yourself agreeing with everything I'm doing and saying, then one of us is excess. I had General Peterson actually said that one time. He told his chief. He said, if you're agreeing with everything that I'm saying and doing, one of us is excess. So. And I don't want someone who's just agreeing with me. I want someone who challenges the thoughts so we come up with a better solution. And Chief always did that. So rule number 1, take ownership of your Air Force. Chief did that. The second one is every airman has a story, and you can't lead your airmen if you don't know their story. Now, that may sound familiar to the people in this room because General Mark Welsh, our current Chief of Staff of the Air Force, I've heard him say that numerous times. And in fact, he was the advisor to the AETC squadron commander. He was the 2-star down there. And so he would tell us that, all of us that were coming to be squadron commanders. So it was reiterated even more to me. I get a discharge package on my desk, and I'm reading about this airman who says why he should be kicked out. Says he's the captain of his high school basketball team. He graduated high school with honors. He'd taken AP classes. He was involved in all facets of his community. He did Habitat for Humanity. And I'm like, Chief, how did we screw this up? How did this young airman, how did we let him fail that he did not do great in our Air Force when you look at all this? And Chief, in the traditional, give me that, and he's looking at it and he says, he starts rattling off where this kid was born, where he really grew up, where he really went to high school, and every problem he'd ever had since. So needless to say, a young airman, after redoing his letter, was discharged when the wing commander saw 2 versions of the letter, the original one and the one that Chief made him go back and rewrite. So I can tell you dozens of stories, and in fact, if you buy me a drink later, I will, back over there, about some of the stuff that the Chief did. And so the last thing, though, is take advantage of the educational opportunities. There's an old saying that we train for the known, we educate for the unknown. To the family member, family members today, one of the things that sets the U.S. enlisted force apart from those around the world, and I work with 40 nations around the world in my current job, it's the education of our enlisted force. Why is education important? Well, because primarily I can't tell you the problems we're going to have 5 years from now or 10 years from now or maybe even next year. But I can tell you education is going to give you the critical thinking skills and problem-solving skills that we need to solve those issues. And we need everybody in this room to take part in that. That's how we survived PPD 720. In fact, Thucydides writes in the history of the Peloponnesian War that a nation that makes a distinction between its scholars and its warriors will have its thinking done by cowards and its fighting done by fools. So again, the Chief did that. He got his degrees. He went to his PMEs. Young airmen, get your education. Chief did. Finally, I think just in closing, I wanted to say 2 things. Don, I'm happy to send Chief back to you in one piece. He is a little bit older, a little slower, a little wiser. If he was a car, some would call him an antique. But if he was a C-130, some would say he's just getting broken in. So I'll just say you're a C-130. So thank you for loaning your husband, Carissa.